We don't normally do a lot of prep for these things, but this is one where we've been on the phone a bit because this is a big, hairy, wild topic. We can't touch on everything. We can only touch on a few big ideas here. Then you guys can come talk to them afterwards. Blockchain, crypto, lots of different stuff going on. Kate, I'd like to start with you, actually.
All right.
You used to work at the DOJ. You were telling me backstage that at one point you were told to go shut down Bitcoin. Now you're lecturing about regulatory stuff. Who is going to regulate cryptocurrency and blockchain broadly? How's that going to work?
Well, so first of all, if we're talking about U.S. regulation in the U.S., I think it's similar to what we saw. There are a lot of parallels that are always drawn between the early days of the internet and cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And I think some of those parallels are really appropriate, particularly where you're talking about regulation, because in the early days of the internet, we heard calls for a single regulator. Should there be a regulator of the internet, and who was going to?
Internet czar.
An internet czar. And you know, that didn't happen. And I think that was probably good that didn't happen. We're seeing similar things here with this technology. So I think when you talk about who's going to regulate in the US, the answer is the same that we see with the internet. You have myriad agencies. You've got DOJ, SEC, CFTC. I won't bore you with the rest of the alphabet soup, but similarly, we saw that with the internet. So no one answer, Peter.
But is it something where there's going to end up being a decree from one of these agencies? And there is a telecom law that effectively sort of regulates a lot of the internet, and over the years we sort of litigated that. You're going to see something like that, or some other way of figuring this stuff out?
I think what you're referring to is the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, but even that didn't come in immediately when we were all using the internet, right? That took several years. It was passed in 1996. I think similarly here, we don't want regulation to outpace understanding. And if you would have had a law about cryptocurrencies or blockchain passed a year ago, it would have been completely outdated today. So I think regulators, lawmakers, policymakers know this. It's important to wait and see how the technology develops. For example, who was talking about ICOs, initial coin offerings, a year and a half ago? We wouldn't have, if we had had a crypto law passed, it wouldn't have covered that. So I don't think we'll see a uniform law on crypto or regulation on crypto. What we'll see instead, I predict, we'll see a series of enforcement actions for some of the worst actors in the space from a variety of different agencies. We will potentially see some legislation in the coming years if it turns out to be necessary. But look, there are already plenty of laws on the books that regulators and lawmakers and law enforcement have. There are money laundering laws, and you know, regulators can adapt to that.
How long practically do you think before you have an established sort of body of law that says this is okay, this isn't okay, this is security, this isn't?
Years.
Is that 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
I mean, I'm not going to slap a number on it, but I think you're talking years. We will see, I think, in the next year to year and a half, a lot more clarity on what is a security, what isn't a security from SEC. Where you're talking about criminal prosecutions, I think you're talking years. And by the way, that's assuming that no one decides to challenge these in court. If someone does, you're talking years for that to make its way through the court system. Remember, too, it's not just regulators that have their finger in this. It's plaintiffs, class action lawyers, and that could take years.
So let's pull out. So we have that uncertainty. We're talking about years before we sort of really know the lay of the land. You've had regulatory issues, Brad, right?
I didn't hear that. We have regulatory what?
You got.
We certainly are following the regulatory dynamic. Yeah.
What does that mean for sort of the rest of the industry where we're sorting out this is okay, this isn't okay, this is a gray area?
Well, so I would agree with what Katie's describing. I think we kind of have had a big bang moment. You know, earlier today, Mary Meeker described the iPhone as the big bang moment. I think blockchain broadly is a big bang moment, and I think you do have regulatory bodies trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean? And I agree with Katie that there are some areas where it's very clear. Some in the crypto community, I think, have kind of argued, well, no, they come from very anarchistic, disruptive, down with the man, down with the government. And I think, look, that's, I think, naive in terms of maturing the business to solve real problems for real customers. And so I think that the regulatory engagement is appropriate. I think the questions that are being asked, sometimes it is clear. We need to follow rules around money laundering and what's called KYC, or know your customer. And those that are trying to circumvent that, I think that will be short-lived.
So is there money sitting on the sideline? Are there money, are there projects, are there things that aren't happening yet that will happen once we've gotten a go signal?
I think that From my point of view, Peter, there is a very vast application for the technology underlying Bitcoin, the distributed ledger technology. And on the one hand, we'll deal with the regulation around currencies, tokens, crypto, and I think that will just continue to expand for all of us. But the use cases really around Bitcoin are more like an operating system for trust, because you have permissioned capability, you have the fact that it's transparent, it's trackable, there's provenance, and as the technology matures and we can do it fast and safely, we'll see all sorts of use cases emerge. So things like the provenance of your food, the provenance of your jewelry, your identity.
So let's talk about that, right? Because the thing you often hear about crypto and blockchain, right, is that if you're smart, if you're sophisticated about this, you don't get consumed with speculation and the currency. You get excited about the technology, right? Truth is, a lot of people are really excited about the currency because it's all over the map. And then when you ask people about things that blockchain is going to allow you to build, a lot of it's ephemeral or it's just off in the future. So your job at IBM, Bridget, is to actually do some of this in the here and now. Can you give me a practical application of how blockchain's working now for one of your customers?
Yeah, so it is very early days with this technology, and I think we're just really starting to see it unfold and its potential unfold. But a great example, I think, of the potential power is one which we're calling food trust. And this is a blockchain which has been built specifically for tracking and recalling in the provenance of food. It's been built with companies like Walmart, Unilever, Dole, Nestle, Kroger, a whole bunch of Tyson, the big names in food. And today, about 420,000 people die every year of food poisoning. Millions get sick. And best in class for food recall is Walmart, which takes 6 days and 18 hours. And on a blockchain, which this group of companies have trialed with us over the last year, and it's up in production with millions of SKUs and transactions going on it, the recall and tracking is within 2 seconds. So this has tremendous implications for speed of recall, safety, the provenance of your food, but 30% of the world's food supply is actually wasted. So if you think about being able to fix that, that's
so huge. I get bad arugula. It's easier for Walmart to figure out that it came from this supplier and tell everyone that it came from that supplier. But why does the blockchain make this happen? Why wouldn't this just happen with a computer?
So what? And I'm sure my colleagues here will say why again, those of us working in blockchain are so excited about it. And again, not to be Pollyannish, but the unique ability in a distributed way to share information between many, many parties simultaneously without having to have a bilateral document flow between parties is very, very unique about the technology. So you can secure it, you can position it, you can show how a contract or data or an object changes over time as it goes through a blockchain. And you can do it across all sorts of organizations.
So with the Walmart example, so how is that practically working in a way that these companies couldn't do on their own without blockchain? Or
because they're able to safely share the information about the food from fork to table, and it's shared once between all the parties in a blockchain.
Who are in some cases competitors?
Who in many cases are competitors. They might be small farmers, they might be huge companies, but they're actually able to share that information. And because it's secure and locked down and they only share what they need to share, it actually safeguards them as competitors. So one of the really interesting things as we watch this technology emerge is that these networks are growing up with very small users in some cases, and then very competitive users in others, and resulting in very different business models.
Can I jump in here, Peter? I would like
Please.
to say also, we talk about government and is the government going to regulate or put it out, shut it down. Let's remember that the governments, including the U.S. government, are using these technologies now. And to jump in on what Bridget was just saying, another great case for, many people think you were your former prosecutor, what's the connection now? One of the things I spent my days doing was combating fraud, waste, and abuse. And I think that there are a lot of great use cases right now with this technology to combat fraud, waste, and abuse. I'll give you 2 examples and why you wouldn't just want a database. One is in the case of Haiti, for example, when the earthquake hit hit Haiti, most all land registry records were lost, permanently lost. And you had competing claims as to who owned what land. That's why you see governments now like Honduras, the Republic of Georgia, Estonia now are putting land registry records, Dubai, also for humanitarian aid tracking, also at the Haiti example, $1 billion was raised by the Red Cross for aid. 500 million of it went missing. So fully half of it went missing. To be able to track this on a blockchain, distributed, open to the public is really key. But just make no mistake.
But you've got to be able to move those files onto the blockchain. It means they have to be digital to begin with.
That's right.
Someone's got to organize all that.
That's correct.
Is there a rubric you guys use and this audience can use to sort of, when you're looking at someone or hearing someone describe a blockchain project, figure out, oh, that's something that could practically happen in the near future, and oh no, that's just something that doesn't work at all and they've just added blockchain to it, or it's something that already works and they've just added the word blockchain to it?
Anytime you want something that's not centralized, right, that's a real honeypot for attack for cyber criminals, it's great to be decentralized. So that's one thing. Not all things need to be decentralized. So that's one thing that I would always look to.
And then where you've got a spaghetti-like process flow, complex supply chains are fantastic for blockchain. Global shipping, for example, they think about 15% of the cost of shipping is on records which are exchanged between parties. So that's a great example. And then where you've actually got an ecosystem that can be convened and a group of people who need to work together, where the financial inclusion that you can get is pretty amazing. To Katie's point, we're working with a microfinance organization in Kenya where they can we're doing real-time credit modeling for issuance of loans on a blockchain. So it's a tiny little network of 200 kiosk owners, and we're able to help them receive loans.
Brad, you're being really quiet here.
Look, I think going back to your kind of macro question here, I think the word blockchain has become catnip for venture investors.
Sure.
I think the hype in reality.
And penny stock investors, right? Long Island Iced Tea,
Long Island
blockchain.
Iced Tea became added blockchain, and now, of course, they're delisted, which they should have been. I think the hype is definitely ahead of the reality in lots of ways, but that doesn't mean that there's not real problems being solved at scale.
Right. So again, how do you, if you're sitting on the outside, go, oh, that makes sense, or no?
You asked, I think, the right question, and I think the question I would encourage the investors and even the audience to think about, ask the question, why wouldn't a database work better? There are a lot of examples where I hear, and I'm sure we all hear, a pitch from somebody like, well, blockchain this, blockchain that. And I think, you know what? A database is a very efficient technology, and you should use a database. Now, there are exceptions to that. There are examples where I think blockchain is transformative. As I said earlier, I think it is a big bang moment for a next generation platform of capabilities. But there's no doubt that the hype and reality is out of balance right now.
What do we think about the blockchain beer vending machine? It's a real thing. I always confuse civil and civic. It's civil?
It's
civic. Sorry.
Civic, yeah.
Look, I think there's a couple of problems with that.
This is something, if you guys haven't seen it, it exists. It was in New York City. You can use blockchain to buy beer from a vending machine.
Look, Bitcoin today, I've made the joke that people talk about using Bitcoin to buy coffee. The average Bitcoin transaction can take as much as 20 minutes to complete a transaction. But if you're going to use Bitcoin for that transaction, it's going to take a long time. Your coffee might get cold, and the transaction costs are going to double the price of your coffee. So I think we may come to find that Bitcoin is kind of the Napster of digital assets. It showed us what's possible. It showed us that, holy cow, this is transformative technology, but Spotify and iTunes and Pandora ruled the day because they actually engaged with the ecosystem. They engaged with regulators to solve a real problem.
Well,
By the way, I talked to the CEO of the beer vending.
No, sorry. You go ahead. Civic.
It's a long day already. And his argument, look, this actually does solve a real problem, being able to have an ID and be able to monitor how much beer you've consumed, and this way you can sell beer without having to have a human being involved. It's a real thing. And to me, it seems like it's a pretty good Rorschach test. Like, you either look at that and laugh and go, this is excess. You go, oh, this is really interesting, and it's a novel way of approaching a problem maybe you didn't believe you had.
Yeah, I think that the thing to think about, just going back to the point about, if you're thinking about how will the world unfold, even though it's early days, is the idea that it becomes a payment for the most simple things that we buy every day, like beer or, washing powder. That's a way out. But I do think this point around that the blockchain will allow you to track and make transparent things that you couldn't before. insurance contracts, art, diamonds. When the diamonds on blockchains, we can do the provenance of entire diamond rings or diamond jewelry. Where you need provenance and transparency, and where you have middlemen in supply chain, those are ripe. And to the point that's underlying all of this, the pain of changing out data and uploading data or reversing out of systems is mitigated by the speed that you will get from using a blockchain and the reduction in terms of the actual digital cost and document cost. And then finally, once you have that data together, we're seeing this on the food trust chain, you can do all sorts of analytics and artificial intelligence insight on the blockchain, such as optimizing supply chain. So those, I think, will be the business cases where it has inherent value, not just as a currency.
Yeah, and I think also you're going to see some leapfrogging, right? Bridget, you mentioned Dubai earlier. For those of you who don't know, Dubai has announced they're going to be a blockchain-backed government nation by 2020, and they estimate they'll save 25 million man-hours a year by putting a lot of things on, digitizing and putting them on blockchain. A lot of those things aren't yet done in that country, and so they have this opportunity. We're seeing this also in Estonia, this happened. Right. And so it's not a case where they're just leapfrogging, right? So they're going straight to the blockchain instead of digitizing first. So you're seeing that in some countries. You're seeing that a lot in developing nations as well.
Can you guys explain the sort of theological rifts that I see when I'm having discussions with people like you? Public blockchain versus private blockchain. Brad, lots of people seem upset with you for some reason. I don't know why.
You're right to call it kind of, I can't remember exact words.
Theological.
Theological. These are holy wars.
Yeah.
This isn't about.
Why are we having holy wars about technology that is barely
you know what, that
here
is
yet?
a great question. But there are groups of people who are grounded in the ideology and passionate zealotry that we're going to overthrow governments. We're sick of being held down by the man, and we're going to circumvent all these regulations and unlock crazy new things. There are, first of all, there's a ton of misinformation out there. And so the holy wars are being fueled by people who are out there saying, because of economic benefit, they are hyping things. They are saying, they're measuring their success by the price of some token. It's like, look, we have to think about this over not 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months. 3 to 5 years from now, I think there's an opportunity. Ripple's very focused on solving one vertical problem.
Which is?
Payments, cross-border payments in particular. I also digress in somewhat humor saying, I think blockchain has its own kind of peanut butter problem. People are they're all over the place. And I think going deep.
Do you want to explain the reference to anyone who wasn't
I think
following
lots of
Yahoo
people
10
here know,
years
so
ago?
I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, but come on.
A long
turn over
time
the
ago,
crowd.
I made the argument that Yahoo is spreading itself too thin.
When you worked at Yahoo.
When I worked at Yahoo. I think that in the blockchain space, understanding a specific customer and solving a specific problem and going deep to really solve that problem, that is a path to success. We saw that with Amazon. Amazon started as Amazon Books. They were world class. They competed with Barnes & Noble and Borders. Again, some of us in this audience are older and were around for this. I think the same thing is going to be true in the blockchain space, that there are lots of industries that could be touched, but it starts with one.
Yeah. I would just weigh in on this theological debate and this point around, permissioned versus private or public. I think there are lots of uses for public. And
people are angry at you guys. You're not really doing real blockchain. It's private blockchain.
Yeah, but exactly. But if you're running businesses, right, and you are together combining data about supply chains to optimize, you certainly do not necessarily want that shared with everyone. So I think the theological debate about public versus private, permission versus non-permission, there will be use cases for all of those. The fact of the matter is, though, once you start to get payment and currency exchange, as Brad said, you are going to want know your customer, anti-money laundering, and you're going to want protections. Yeah. The other thing is, I do want to take issue with you a bit when you said the hype exceeds the reality. What I see is the hype around cryptocurrency for sure exceeds the reality of everything, but it actually obscures to some extent the real work that has been doing on real blockchains. And as an example, just that we're working with 4 out of the top 10 of the Fortune 500 on live blockchains, not proof of concepts, but live stood up blockchains. And so I think when you start to think about big companies getting going, again, early days, but I think it is moving quite quickly beyond hype.
What if it turns out that blockchain is primarily best for the stuff that Brad is doing? It's primarily best for payments, and there's different kinds of things you can do with it, but practically this is useful for institutions and people who want to buy and sell things and derivations of that. If that's all it turns out to be, Are people going to be disappointed, or is that still a very big deal?
Well, I think within the Ripple ecosystem, within the XRP ecosystem, that is a multi-trillion-dollar problem.
And I gave you just the biggest softball in the world. I apologize for that.
No, I welcome it. Look, today we announced the largest bank in Kuwait became a customer of RippleNet. There is a massive inefficiency in how global money moves. I've made the joke many times, which is actually quite serious. The fastest way for you to get money to London today is to drive from here to LAX and fly it there. That's a crazy statement, and there's all kinds of inefficiencies about how global liquidity, global cash is managed, which makes our financial system less efficient. We can accelerate the engine of global commerce by leveraging these technologies. Bridget, I think, characterized it well. If you can accelerate transactions, reducing the cost, making them far more efficient. I mean, imagine this. SWIFT has a published error rate of 6%. Imagine if 6 out of 100 Google searches resulted in a 404. It's inconceivable. Yet our global financial infrastructure has a 6% error rate. It takes days to settle a transaction and costs way more than it should. And the people who are penalized the most are the people who can least afford to handle that.
And does it matter if consumers aren't directly touching this stuff, if they're not going to buy coffee with Bitcoin, if this is all happening behind the scenes? Do you see the fervor for the ICOs go away if this ends up not being a consumer product?
Well, I think we're seeing, I would say we're seeing fervor for ICOs go away, except then yesterday announced the largest ICO, $4 billion, with Block 1 and EOS.
Yeah.
So perhaps the fervor is not going away. I mean, last year it was $3 billion. And people thought that the brakes were going to be put on it a little bit because securities regulators around the world, by the way, not just in the U.S., were saying, hold on. However, this year alone, we've seen double that amount already. I think you asked if a lot of money was sitting on the sidelines, institutional money. From where I sit, I think yes, undoubtedly. And this is less about blockchain, more about cryptocurrencies, or as I call them, crypto assets. And I think a lot of money is sitting on the sidelines. What we saw when Japan passed a series of cryptocurrency-specific regulations in that country, and after that happened, and after the regulatory picture became a little more certain, you saw mainstream adoption and also mainstream institutions coming in that country. I think we'll see the same thing here. I think as the regulatory picture becomes a bit more clear, we'll see crypto assets really have more mainstream adoption here. Not necessarily, like you're saying, for to buy a cup of coffee. I mean, part of the problem there with using Bitcoin right now, as it is today, as payment is frankly the price and the volatility. I mean, there's famously the guy who bought two pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins, which would be worth $100 million today. So no one wants to be that guy. And that's
even
keeping
if it's really
people
good pizza, yeah.
Really good pizza.
You know, Peter, on this point around the, will it have the impact if it just hit payments? Firstly, I really want to reinforce what Brad said. 40% of the world today is unbanked, right? It costs unbanked. So the minute you could put payments or tokens on a blockchain, like my microfinance example, you can increase that trust.
So that's somewhere, whether in America or a developing country, you cannot get a loan, and
a
they've got a little
massive
stand.
population in America is unbanked. I think around 25%. So blockchains allow you to tokenize currency, tokenize fiat currency, but also create tokens of all sorts of things of value. So again, a real life example is Plastic Bank, where again, if you look at the human impact, by 2050, the volume of fish in the ocean will be exceeded by the volume of plastic. And so David Katz, CEO of Plastic Bank, has basically tokenized plastic on a blockchain for poor communities around the world to collect plastic and then be able to convert and trade it. So I can see a world where networks can create tokens of value that allow those networks to be included and to accelerate, whether it's microfinance or things like Plastic Bank.
People who are excited about blockchain and crypto frequently say this is like the early days of the internet, and it's going to take a while, we've just been talking about this several times, for us to sort of figure out what it can really do in its full capacity. But I'm old. I remember when the World Wide Web became a thing an average person could get to, and you couldn't probably think about Uber and products like that, but you got right away that you could send email,
You would have never got, though, that you would be downloading and streaming content and video because you could barely connect long enough.
You could see that it didn't work very well, but there's lots of things that you could do with it right away. You could look at pictures of naked people. You could share recipes. You could get news. There are all sorts of things that worked.
So convenience of search to...
But should it be concerning that someone like myself is sort of straining and asking experts to sort of explain how blockchain is going to work? this far into it, or are you guys confident that no, we're on the
I
same
don't think
track?
that's concerning, because I don't think right now digital assets and blockchain are solving consumer problems. I mean, you think about I think 100% of the examples you heard us all talk about were infrastructure. You know, I describe myself as we're a plumber to the global financial infrastructure. And that's not about going to Starbucks and using XRP to buy a coffee.
Yeah.
You could do that, hypothetically, and Starbucks could choose to accept that. But I don't think that's where we are. You know, Vitalik, one of the founders of the Ethereum ecosystem, he was on a panel at a Ripple event, and the question he was asked was, who's the competition? And he pulled out a $20 Canadian bill and said, this is the competition. I couldn't disagree more. If we go out and say we're going to attack the system or attacking fiat, at the same event we had Ben Bernanke come and speak, and he's like, look, central governments will control M1 money supply. This is fundamental to being a sovereign nation. And so this idea that I agree with Katie, like, I don't call it cryptocurrency. I refer to them as digital assets. Cryptocurrency suggests I'm going to go to Amazon and buy things with this.
You pay with currency, right? This is a new asset class.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in the space think these are new asset classes, and they're all, quite frankly, very different. I mean, the asset class that you have, XRP, is very different from Ethereum, is very different from Bitcoin. We talked about the holy wars. You've got fork with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. One of the reasons for, by the way, the warring factions is people are economically incented in a lot of cases who hold a particular asset to trash talk the other. And they're economically incented to do that.
Yeah.
And they don't always disclose their own motivations.
Yeah.
There's a lot of subterfuge that occurs.
Yeah. I think the thing to think about, though, is the underlying technology for consumer applications is there, and we have many examples, actually, of clients or firms experimenting. So Marsh McLennan is putting insurance contracts on a blockchain for normal people like you and I to have insurance records. CDC is looking at healthcare records. There's work going on in Canada around vaulting identity, so that you could vault your identity in a bank and those records can be permissioned, that you can actually trust that nobody can use your records or your information.
And your bias is, because it's your job to do it, is it's here now. We don't have to wait for it.
My experience and our work is it's here now. The technology we've all been working on and investing in is here now and advancing. So we have things like crypto anchors where you can physically verify goods. And I think what is still unknown are where these business models will go, to my colleagues' points. And the fact that it does require some very different behavior. There's more inclusion with competitors or people who haven't collaborated before. These business models are not necessarily simple, but the technology there to run them is for sure there.
So you guys have been very patient with me. I want to open it up to the audience. You got three experts here. You can see me struggling with some of these questions, and I'm sure you've got a different version of it. So why don't we start in the audience?
So I have a question for, so Brad, you're not allowed to answer this just initially, and just because, stay with me for a second. If you look at the future, if you go 5 years out, if you go 10 years out, I believe that this distributed ledger technology could be absolutely huge for a lot of the use cases you've mentioned, Bridget. This could be one of the technologies where the structure of the technology industry looks different. There's a new set of players that rise. That's why you're not allowed to answer. Do you guys agree with that? Do you see new companies on a mega scale rising, or do you see like the classic database vendors or the classic companies that could kind of buy into these technologies, kind of owning them and taking them? Just kind of curious for how you see it affecting the structure of the industry, because it goes across every vertical. This could be massive.
Go ahead, Bridget.
So again, very early days, and none of us has a crystal ball, but I see that the traditional technology companies will engage, and we see that already. I see that new technology companies will evolve, and we've seen some amazing technology breakthroughs, and I think we'll look back 5 years and we'll have some great big technology companies coming out of this. And then I also see that traditional incumbent companies such as jewelry owners or mines will actually run and own blockchain networks. So the monetization of blockchain will not just be the technology provider, but it'll be the owners and participants in the network. So one can think about it as both the technology provider, but also who will convene and be the winner takes most in many of these networks. That's one angle. The other angle, since you've asked, I actually think this is a very democratizing technology. I don't think that necessarily the big four has to dominate this, because many people can start networks, and this technology is available. It's easy to do a blockchain and build one now.
can I interject one thing? The one observation I'd make in terms of being a democratizing technology, which theoretically I agree with, don't lose sight of the fact that Bitcoin today, part of these holy wars, Bitcoin today is controlled by China. There are 4 miners that control more than 51% of the hash rate, and they can control the future of Bitcoin. And I listened to Senator Warner this morning talking about the influence of China around technology. This is a real issue.
Mm-hmm. And this is why you have the government paying such close attention to this. And again, it's coming at it from many angles. I mean, you have the government using these technologies, right? Yeah. You have them also regulating these technologies, and you have them keeping a really close eye on them for the very reasons that you just mentioned, Brad.
Yeah, and they can also help government with regulation itself, right? Storing know your customer records on a blockchain is something that's being done by the Monetary Authority of Singapore.
Hi, I'm Josh Ogle with Samples.com. I was wondering what you guys thought about the dangers involved with people investing in cryptocurrency. So, for example, let's take XRP, for example, and conflating that with Ripple, the business. These are two very different things, and I'm worried that, as someone who's somewhat entrenched in the crypto world, I'm worried that confusion, which has caused a lot of money to come in, eventually, if there's some kind of crash, it won't be because the businesses don't do well. It'll be because there's a misunderstanding of what someone's actually investing in.
You're echoing 100% my point of view. I said earlier, there's a lot of misinformation out there. We spend, the team at Ripple spends a lot of time correcting media. Like, there's XRP, it's an open source blockchain. There's also a company called Ripple that is using that technology to enable various solutions, in this case, a cross-border payments problem. We can't control the XRP ledger broadly, but there's a lot of misinformation, and some people try to fuel that misinformation. It's frustrating, but that's why I come up here and talk about it and try to clarify. But thank you.
Yeah.
Katie, I mean, this is your specialty, or one of your specialties, is sort of figuring out whether or not there's active fraud versus confusion on the consumer's perspective, and at what point regulators should step in to either prevent the fraud or at least give consumers a better shot at understanding what's going on. You mentioned, was it Bitfile? Who's doing the $4 billion ICO?
Oh, no, it's EOS.
EOS.
And I believe it's Block One.
Block One.
Yeah.
So they explicitly say, we're doing this in the Caymans so we can be out of reach of regulators.
Well, I don't know that they said so that. I mean,
that's what the Wall Street Journal says.
Well, okay.
So
I don't know that they would say
when
that.
you do that, when you're incorporating outside the U.S., what kind of protection? What kind of protection does someone in the U.S. have when they're engaging with that? And then two, if you're a regulator in the U.S. and you want to intercede, how do you go about doing that?
So I think, and this is not unique to the U.S. By the way, people say, well, why do you believe that? Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what the law is. And the law is, it's not just in the U.S. There is broad extraterritorial reach, not just of U.S. securities laws, but of all kinds of different jurisdictions' securities laws. So I always wonder when some projects, I won't name names, say we're going to this jurisdiction or we're going to relocate here. The fact of the matter is, if you're marketing to U.S. investors and you have U.S. victims, if there are people who lose money in this, you can bet that the U.S. regulators might well exercise jurisdiction no matter where you are. And it's not going to be enough to say, well, we're a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I'm not picking on EOS here, by the way. I'm just saying, I think what they said is to avoid regulatory scrutiny, Peter. I don't think they said that's why they went to the Caymans. I think they said that's why they were not going to market to U.S. investors or Chinese investors. However, I think one of the things regulators are going to rightly look at is, okay, even if you cut yourself off from the U.S. or Chinese market, did you know there was a secondary market and you were kind of willfully blind? So you knew that you were really having U.S. investors. And, that's one of the reasons that these things take a lot of time. To do an enforcement action like that, you can bet that the government could be doing undercover buys. They might be doing search warrants. They'll be obtaining emails.
So a body of water is not going to prevent you from being regulated.
That's a good way to put it.
Real quick, Fred?
Hey, Fred Vogelstein at Wired. How are you guys? Facebook said that it's starting a whole blockchain division. Did I step out of the room and miss this question?
No, it was on my list. Thank you for asking.
Okay. Can you guys speculate about some of the things that blockchain could help Facebook do? One of the questions I always had was whether or not it would help them deal with their fake account issue better, but I don't know enough about the technology to know whether or not it could do that. So I guess I'd ask you guys to speculate a little bit.
that away.
Well, I'm not going to speculate. I will say that I remember that Mark Zuckerberg posted when he made one of his New Year's resolutions publicly to learn more about blockchain technologies. And it's, again, not just blockchain, it's blockchain technologies. So it could be permissioned, could be public, and cryptocurrencies. And I believe he posted was to help see if they could solve the fake ad problem. So I think that's one of the reasons that he has personally identified. I don't know if you guys are aware of others.
I don't know.
So Katie gets the last word. You guys are great. Thank you so much. I
Thanks, Peter.
appreciate the crash course.
Thank you.